Welcome back once again to Darktown. Population unknown, but decreasing with every passing story. Tonight we take another journey together through this ostensibly normal, everyday American Midwest city, where we will witness murder in Darktown. It's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink and listen. Now we venture for the first time this evening into Darktown. On his 18th birthday, he lost his father to a drunk driver, a tragedy that left him alone to pick up the pieces. A month after the funeral, he received a letter his father had written on the day he died, filled with words he'd longed to hear his whole life. But that wasn't the end. A year later, another letter arrived from beyond the grave. His handfather's writing, describing an unbelievable place he'd found himself in, searching for his mother in an endless city of silver towers and strange beings. Was someone playing a cruel prank, or was his father reaching out to him from another realm? Join us as we uncover the mystery that's haunted him forever. Today marks the 20th anniversary of my father's death, taken away by a single, senseless act. It just so happens that today is also my birthday. He'd been working late, as he often did, regardless of birthdays or holidays. I understood it was a painful memory for him, and though our relationship had always been a bit strained, I never blamed him for making a living because, well, as a single father, he had a lot on his mind, and I respected that. That night, on my 18th birthday, my father was hit by a drunk driver on his way home. He never even made it to the hospital. His insides were so utterly torn to pieces by the impact that he simply died before the paramedics could even show up. A few weeks after the funeral, I was trying to piece together the legal mess that comes following someone's death, inheritance and so on. It certainly wasn't anything a teenager should have to deal with, but I was alone, no close family, no one to guide me through the world. Ironically, his lawyer seemed to know more about my father than I did. After dealing with whatever assets left behind, he'd been given a set of instructions, all prepared by my father should he meet an untimely demise. I signed all the necessary documents and was given some advice on how to survive the loss of a loved one. And then I received a letter. It was wrapped in a beautiful silver envelope, only decorated with my name. I opened it, careful not to rip it apart, and started reading. Dear Richard, I'll start this letter by admitting to one undeniable truth. I'm not a good man, and I've been an even shittier father. I've made plenty of mistakes, left too many things unsaid. I can make up the excuse that I'm simply a product of my time and the people that raised me, but I'll cut through the bullshit and just apologize. Your mother died while giving birth. It's a hard fact to live with, and though I've seemed cold at times, I need you to know that I never blamed you for any of it. How could I? You came to this world as a beautiful little creature, never asking for life, yet appreciating every moment of it. I'm writing this on your birthday. You've just turned 18, and I'm staying behind at work to finish this up. I don't think I'll hand it to you yet. I'm still not done dealing with my own issues, but I promise that as soon as I'm able to man up, I'll tell you all the things I should have as you grew up. But I'm proud of you, that I love you. I wish I could say this to your face, but I'm a coward. Taught myself that emotions are for the weak, and so for now, I'll put this on paper. It'll be waiting among my other things, my last will and testament, should anything ever happen to me. But that'll hopefully be many years from now, and by then you won't even need this letter to remind you. You are a better man than me, Rick. I hope you know that. I'm sorry I haven't been a better father, but I promise I'll change. I love you. Dad. My father had died the same day that he wrote that letter. He probably instructed the secretary to send the letter to his lawyer in the morning. I really don't know how else they would have gotten hold of it. I read the letter a couple of more times before folding it neatly back up. Then I just sat down on the floor and cried. I'd kept it together for so long, never shed a tear as the police officer handed me the news, and I continued my cold appearance throughout the funeral proceedings, because he was right. We'd never been close, and I never thought that he loved me. But hearing those simple words, though only from a piece of paper, was far more than I could handle. I dug up some old photo albums from my childhood, sifting through them and realizing he always seemed happy, smiling wide in each photo as I turned the pages. Seeing those memories in a new light truly broke my heart. We'd left so much unsaid, but all the emotions were there, shown through the smiles on our faces and the moments we'd shared. That's what truly mattered. Not the words that could have been said, but the time spent together. And that would have been it. My father had passed, and life moved on. I kept the small house for myself. It was already bought and paid for, and I kept on with my studies. And then, 1 year later, on my birthday, I received another letter. It was a beautiful silver envelope, just like the last one, encased in a pattern of vines and bizarre-looking symbols, just small enough to remain hidden at first glance. In the center, it simply said my name, written crudely, but not without charm. His handwriting was unmistakable. The letter without a doubt came from my father. But how had he sent it 1 year past his demise? I thought about it briefly and figured he must have instructed his lawyer to send a letter on my birthday each year. It sounded like something he would have done, but I'd already been surprised the last year, so I just opened it and started reading. Dear Richard, where do I begin? I'm not even sure if this letter will reach you, considering where I am, but I'm giving it a shot anyway. It's been exactly 1 year since my death, though I have to admit, time works a bit differently here. It feels like 100 years have passed since you turned 18, yet I know that for you, only 1 year has gone by. I'm not much of a poet, but I'm sure not even Edgar Allan Poe could have found the words to describe the beauty of this place. It is, simply put, unbelievable. You need to know that I never suffered. The car hit me at such a speed that it killed me instantly. No pain, nor any memory from the incident. My world just disappeared, and a moment later I woke up surrounded by the most beautiful light. Where here is, I'm not exactly sure. I suppose it's heaven, though I can't say exactly what I did to deserve such a gift. It's like a city, stretching endlessly as far as I can possibly see. Buildings, spires covered in silver that stretch up into the sky, hiding among the clouds above, perfectly constructed and each magnificent in their own way. There are no horizons here. The world only ends when it's too far away to comprehend, just tiny figures dancing in the distance. But it's beautiful nonetheless, enveloped in colors I never knew existed. It's perfect. We don't feel hunger, thirst, nor tiredness, yet the food is bountiful and always tastes exquisite. I don't need it, but it's a joy to feast nonetheless, never feeling too full, never gaining nor losing weight. Well, there are some things I can't tell you. The guards, or angels, I'm not sure what to call them, but they're telling me I have to follow the rules. Upon asking, they simply scoffed and told me to figure it out on my own. They're certainly not the beautiful creatures I expected them to be, but that doesn't really matter. What matters is that I'm looking for your mother. But, well, in an endless city, that's easier said than done. There's really no register here, so no one can actually tell me where to find anyone. Though I suppose with eternity ahead of me, I'll just have to keep looking. The population is strangely scattered here, and no one I spoke to has been here for more than a few years. I suspect there's some kind of hierarchy in place, or maybe we have to wander further into the city to find our loved ones. It's a lot to take in, and I wish I could tell you more, but I need to go. In any case, I love you, Rick. I wish I'd said that while I was still alive, but at the very least, this is better than nothing. Love, Dad. I wasn't sure how to react. Sure, it was his handwriting, but it had to be some kind of a joke. I called up his old lawyer and asked if he'd sent the letter on behalf of my father. He denied it, saying his job had ended the moment I signed over my father's remaining assets here on Earth. Next, I turned to the few friends I had, interrogated them about the letter, without revealing its content. They acted innocent, which made me feel guilty. They'd been great, as long as I'd known them, always there for me. Without them, I couldn't have survived the passing of my father. So, without any further solutions, I let it go. I put the letter alongside the rest of my father's belongings and forced myself to move on. I almost forgot. I truly did. And then the third letter arrived, yet again on my birthday, exactly 1 year later. Dear Richard, I found her. After an impossibly long search, I finally found her. Your mother, Helen, the love of my life. I knew she had to be here. She's always been one of the best people I knew. Well, I guess I should explain. As I said in my last letter, time doesn't flow as you'd expect, at least not here. Despite that, we keep track of it, just like we do back on Earth. I suppose it makes it easier to look out for our loved ones. It just feels longer. Your mother, she's, not exactly herself. I found her on top of one of the spires. Rick, I've never seen her like this. She looks nothing like the woman I knew and loved before, and yet I know it's her. I can feel it in my heart. Oh, she's so skinny, emaciated, on the brink of starvation. I didn't even realize that could happen. I haven't eaten myself in weeks, yet I feel completely fine. She just keeps repeating the same sentences over and over. I don't understand. I tried to be good. What did I do wrong? I tried to convince her to leave with me, but she doesn't even recognize who I am anymore. And I can't simply force her. Believe me, I've tried. Up here, it's impossible to do anything to anyone against their will. I realized that when I tried to write about what I'd seen on the first day, but found that I couldn't form the words. It's hard to describe, but we have free will here as long as we follow the rules. Anything else is literally impossible. The angels turned their attention to me after I hung around your mother for more than a few days. They told me to leave her alone. I tried to explain, but they wouldn't listen. I had to leave her, Rick. I couldn't stand to see her like that, but I'll keep checking up on her, I promise. Once I'd tried the few ideas I could think of, well, I asked some other people here for help, but most of them are like myself, new and clueless. The few veterans I found only tell me to let it be, that I'll get in trouble if I keep messing around. I've got to go now. They're looking at me. I love you, Rick. I hope we don't see each other too soon. Just have a good life. It's far too short. His handwriting seemed rushed towards the end. I must have read that letter through a dozen times, trying my best to figure out what was going on. Since I had no means of tracking the letter, I couldn't do much other than listen to my gut. Now, as strange as it might sound, I believed every word I read. I decided I would respond, that I would write to my dad and see what happened. Honestly, I felt kind of stupid as I put the letter down at my doorstep, expecting it to magically vanish during the night. But even the smallest chance of contacting the afterlife, well, was one worth taking. Of course, when I opened the door the following day, it was still there, mushy with smudged ink from a small storm that had passed during the night. Defeated, I could do nothing but wait for another year to pass. As my birthday rolled round, I hatched a plan to catch whoever delivered the letters. I camped outside in my garden, waiting for the culprit. Hours passed. I waited from the early hours, and as midday arrived, I decided to call it quits and head back inside. There it lay, on the other side of my front door, on top of my slippers, a perfect silver envelope with my name written on it. Dear Richard, I found someone willing to answer my questions. They claim they've kept an eye on me for some time, but I wasn't ready to see them, and so they kept me waiting, hoping I'd one day come around. I'm not exactly sure what they meant by ready, but they say that until I see what this place truly is, I won't understand. Unlike my other companions, these people weren't smiling. They didn't seem healthy, but appeared as sickly, twisted human beings that have long since forgotten who they once were. They gave me a heads up, though, that time only passes as fast as we need it to, that a year can feel like a century, or it can pass by in a week, whatever that means. They mention something they simply refer to as the Dome. They say it's in the center of the city, an almost impossible distance away. They offered to take me there once I'm ready, but I can't. I need to stay. I have to take care of your mother. Of course, the Silver City still stands tall and magnificent, but the food has lost its taste. Drinks just feel unnecessary. I've indulged on occasion, tried to recreate the feelings I once had when I first arrived here, but to no avail. My only purpose now is to find a way of reconnecting with your mother. I know I can get through to her. I just need to find a way. While I search for answers, I still visit her from time to time, just to sit by her side as she stares off into the distance. Maybe I'll one day get a glimpse of what occupies her mind, and hopefully she knows that she's not alone. I know she's utterly broken, but as long as I'm able to, I'll protect her. I promise you that. Happy birthday, Rick. I'm happy I have the opportunity to stay in touch, even if it's impossible for you to respond. I love you, Dad. That's how my life went on from then. Each year, on my birthday, my father sent me a silver letter. Just updates from the afterlife. And as bizarre as it felt, I felt happy to have a connection with my dad, though it had been partially tainted by the image of my sickly mother standing atop of a spire. On the 15th anniversary of my father's death, my life had taken a drastic turn for the better. I'd just gotten engaged to the love of my life after 5 years. This all came on top of a promotion at work. All in all, life seemed to be going my way, and my birthday was just around the corner, and, as always, I eagerly awaited my silver letter. There it was, lying on the doorstep, except, rather than a perfectly smooth envelope with vines and symbols engraved onto the surface, I found a crumpled piece of paper, one covered in erratic handwriting, incomprehensible phrases and drawings. Richard, she's gone. Your mother, Helen. I went back to the spire. I had an idea, but she'd simply vanished, leaving nothing behind, no trace that she'd ever existed. I knew something was wrong even before getting there. Buildings have always seemed impossibly tall, but that time I just couldn't get up the stairs. They kept going for days, weeks of climbing, and once I finally reached the top, I was alone. I've searched this entire section of the city, climbed each building to the top, asked whatever person was willing to talk to me. Oh, I don't know what to do. I haven't eaten anything since we last spoke a year ago, nor have I had a drink. I don't sleep. I don't do anything other than search for her. I wanted to send you a letter earlier. I needed to tell you what happened, but I had to wait, because of the rules, those damned rules. A few weeks ago, I approached one of the guards. I don't know why I hadn't thought of it before. But if heaven was real, then God had to be somewhere up here. I asked the guard about it, and he laughed at me. He touched me on my shoulder and whispered a few incomprehensible words into my ear. It was like a veil was lifted from me. I could truly see this place for what it was. A concrete jungle with a sky so dark, I don't know how I didn't notice it before. The buildings around me, once what I would have considered works of art, so perfect, a creation that simply couldn't be built by man. Well, I finally see them for what they are. Old, run-down concrete prisons on the brink of collapse. They should have fallen long, long ago, and yet there they stand, defying all logic, a pitiful sight to behold. The people I came here with have long since gone. All of them are heading towards the dome. In their place I'm finding more and more people who've been here for an eternity, hundreds, thousands of years, and they all seem the same. They're all diseased. Whatever features they once had, whoever they once were, it doesn't matter anymore. They've simply existed for far too long, an eternity of time to wash away what once made them human. I think it's time for me to wander through the Silver City. Maybe I just need to reach the dome. Maybe I can find your mother there. Maybe I can finally get some answers. Whatever the cost, I can't go on like this. I'm not sure how long it'll be until I send another letter. The road towards the dome is different, but this is something I have to do. I hope you understand. Dad. 5 years passed without another silver letter. The first year I was worried. The second I felt scared, but as the third and fourth rolled around, I felt relieved. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted off my shoulders. I'd never been much of a religious person before my father died, and yet I'd never feared death. But now, knowing what awaited me on the other side wasn't the perfect heaven we'd all been taught about, I felt horrified. As guilty as it makes me feel, I never wanted to receive another letter from my father. Then, we arrive at today, my birthday. It's the 20th anniversary of my father's death. As a habit, the first thing I did in the morning was check the front door. There, on the ground, lay a silver envelope. I picked it up in uncomfortable anticipation. My heart raced as I held it with trembling hands. Crudely drawn pictures covered the front, symbols I couldn't decipher, and a drawing of a dome-like structure surrounded by bizarre shapes that I assumed to be twisted spires. On the inside I found another letter. It was filled with meaningless phrases, jumbled words and sentences I couldn't understand. It was a mess of erratic handwriting, nonsensical and horrifying. From the several pages filled to the brim with text of varying sizes, all I could make out was the following. They gave us everything we wanted, all the imaginable pleasures of the world and more, only to take it away, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the memory of better times. A cruel joke played on us by whatever creature rules this place. I thought this was heaven, but it's not. I'm in hell. We're all in hell. But it's not a punishment. It never was. It's just all there is. Death is the beginning of a nightmare that never ends. And there's no way out, no alternative. I'm going to enter the dome now. I don't know what I'll find on the other side, but I feel this will be the last letter I ever send you. Enjoy what you have left of life, Richard, because once it's over, you'll be right here by my side.
Growing up in Darktown, this young man was warned. Never stay up past 8:30 or the man of 1,000 faces would come for you. He thought it was just a bedtime story, until his best friend Robert disappeared, and he followed him. What he found shattered his childhood forever. In the dead of night, Robert had vanished into a TV screen, a hypnotic show, twisted and alive. In an endless corridor of neon lights and doors, he met the man, a horrifying figure who wore faces like masks. And now, we learn his fate. Should we share the story and keep the children safe from the man of 1,000 faces?
There's a reason we can't watch TV after 8:30 p.m, and it's not because of the watershed. If someone is reading this, and I hope someone is, because I'll be lobotomized soon and forced to forget everything, I want to prove my innocence. I spent so many years locked in this sanitarium, and all for protecting the children from that monster of a man. But now it seems I've fallen into the hands of his creation. Please get this out so that the children will be safe from the man of 1,000 faces. Back when I lived in the small town of Arkham, Massachusetts, there was little I could do at 10 years old other than indulge my love of TV. Oh, I loved it so much. It's a shame that it was muscled out by the internet. I remembered my misspent childhood days just sat there in front of the beautiful box. Whether I was watching my favorite weekend cartoons or tuning into game shows right after school, you'd be hard-pressed to find a day when I wasn't in front of the set. However, like many other children around the area in which I lived, I was forced away from my precious TV at 8:30. The main reason was due to the watershed ending. Now, I'd argue bordering on straight-up fighting with my mum to let me watch until 10 p.m, but I was always told no, and that if I kept on watching the TV past that time, the man of 1,000 faces would find and kidnap me, never to be seen again. I personally didn't believe in the urban legend, but both my parents and even grandparents were adamant of his existence. I'd go to school and feel left out as my friends would tell me of the cool shows that were broadcast past Watershed, like the outrageous Saturday Night Live or WWF, yet none of them had ever seen the man of 1,000 faces. On the 20th of February, I remember walking to school and seeing a flyer stuck to a post. As always, the flyer was a missing person report. This wasn't uncommon, sadly, but I'd developed a passion for collecting these flyers. Missing. Kelly Roon. Disappeared on the 15th of February, last seen watching TV at her dad's house. I grabbed the flyer and shoved it into my pocket to present to my friends at school. I had, after all, sat next to Kelly all of last year, and felt it only right to get her disappearance noticed. I guess I understood why. A small girl who was known to have an alcoholic dad and had attempted to run away before might not seem like the work of a fairy tale man living in the TV, but, well, this felt off. A few children had disappeared from around our town and were usually found departed just outside the industrial estate. The first few disappearances went under everyone's radar, but when a child named Tyler McMolly, rest his soul, was taken, well, it shook the town. Tyler was the first child who was found alive, if you could call it that. His body was covered entirely with puncture holes that led into his veins. His veins themselves seemed all but collapsed, but he was missing both a kidney and his liver. Apparently his very last words were, "Don't let the man of 1,000 faces get me." But this was from an unreliable source, so take that as you will. I overheard the stories that circulated, and soon they gave birth to the urban legend of Tyler McMolly. Well, now a popular story that kids told on the playground went that one night Tyler was watching his favorite TV show, Marathon, on Cartoon Network. When the clocks turned to 8:30, Tyler was sent to bed, angry and defiant. Well, Tyler waited for his parents to go to bed, and then he made his move. Like a ninja, he silently slipped out of bed and through the crack in his door, softly tiptoed down the stairs and into his living room, where he turned on the TV. Tyler sat down with a remote in one hand and a few chocolate bars that he stashed away, and he began searching the channels. After a while, Tyler kept seeing a character that was dressed in the same suit, but had a different person wearing it that corresponded to the show. A prime instance was the black and white checkered suit that was worn by a news anchor, and then in the next program there was a children's show with a person's head replaced with a puppet. Tyler became more and more discomfited by this, but continued looking through the shows until the early hours of the morning. When Tyler's parents woke up at 7 a.m., they were in fits of panic. Tyler had vanished from the house. The only thing left of him was the TV remote, a few chocolate bars, and his imprint in the chair. Well, the neighbors and the police were no help either. Everyone just assumed Tyler had run away until they found his barely living body that was. The story did its rounds of the playground like any normal horror story would, and from that day on, I began collecting the flyers. When I presented the flyer to my friends and told them the man of 1,000 faces had captured another child, well, they all laughed at me. No one more so than my best friend. Now, my best friend was a guy named Robert, and he, for one, definitely didn't believe in the man of 1,000 faces. In fact, he would actively scrutinize me for even talking about him. Robert was what you'd call a no-nonsense person with a very forceful attitude to boot. So much so that the nickname he had until his untimely passing was Bossy Bart. As part of a plan to show me this man of 1,000 faces was a fabrication, Robert invited me to a sleepover at his house. Once I'd arrived at the house, we began watching TV up until we were told to turn it off by his parents. Robert mockingly said, "Oh, we know we'll risk being kidnapped by the man of 1,000 faces." Robert scoffed at his parents and continued to proclaim that we were adults now and we should be able to watch the good post-watershed programs. When his mother became adamant, well, not wanting to be sent back home myself, I dragged Robert to his room, though be it through his angered, gritted teeth. As we sat in the decent-sized bedroom, I decided to recite a horror story based on my interpretation of the man of 1,000 faces. I believe he must have been a former TV personality who one day upset the wrong people by calling a family irresponsible or something. Then, as he left his show set, he was kidnapped. The people who jumped him drove him out to the now empty industrial district, where they beat him and left him in a blood heap, but alive. Fate, however, had a different idea. A large, loose piece of roof fell onto his neck, severing his head. And now, in death, his spirit takes children away from irresponsible parents to show them a better future, and those who would rather return home would end up dead and stripped of their organs for the other children to eat. Word for word, Robert said, "What a load of bull. That's put me right to sleep," the unimpressed tone ringing from his voice. I angrily turned to face the wall to sleep. I didn't need to talk to him during this sleepover after all. Just before I did fall asleep, I saw Robert stand up and mutter something like, "I'll prove it's false." I was woken violently by Robert shaking me. Through my haze, I could see his face looking twisted and distorted through the dark. He almost looked like he was about to die from fear. In my sleepy state, I attempted to ask what was going on, but all Robert did was begin to rock back and forth, crying about the man of 1,000 faces and just how real he was. Before I could do anything, a large snapping sound rang throughout the house, and Robert went still. The once fear-filled boy that was Robert now stood up, completely frozen. Without making a sound, Robert quickly walked to his door and slipped through, first to the landing and then down the stairs. He silently moved into the living room where his giant TV shone a disheartening static around the room. As Robert approached the TV, a program began to play through the heavy static of the screen. The show looked like something from a network access channel, which seemed strange as Robert's family had satellite TV. The TV showed a shot of a table seating around 10 children, 4 on each side, 2 sitting opposite each other on the ends. Robert, seemingly bewitched, began to climb through the living room window, walking towards the industrial district that was just beyond the highway behind his house. As I watched my best friend mindlessly walk through the darkened hours of the morning, both in his PJs and barefoot, I knew he had to be hypnotized or something. After staying a safe distance to Robert, we came to a small storage building that sat nestled behind the much bigger-looking corporate warehouses. Robert entered and began climbing through a metal trap door that lay open on the back wall. As I walked forwards, I could see the door slowly closing, so I made a dash for it. Sliding under the door, I fell about 5 feet onto a lush, felt-carpeted floor. The area I'd landed in resembled a long, funhouse-style corridor, with multiple morphed doors that radiated different bright colors and had neon lights peeking from the cracks. I could see Robert entering a door at the far end of the corridor, and I began to run as fast as my legs could take me, but the more I ran, the further the corridor seemed to stretch. I stopped running and collapsed from exhaustion. The taste of copper filled my breath as my lungs heaved back and forth. As I raised my head to assess how far the ever-extending corridor had become, I fell forward and landed on the door. The door itself was designed to look like a rainbow, having all the colors converge into a white circle in the center of the door. Above the door was an off-red bulb and a sign that said, "When lights turn red, no admittance." I opened the door and slowly entered a large room, roughly the size of a school gymnasium. In front of me were 2 giant bleachers filled with what looked like crudely cut-out children and their parents. A loud buzzer filled the room, and in a panic I rushed underneath the closest bleachers. I looked over the large area between the cutouts and saw an area that resembled that of an old TV kids show. The show's setting was of a large birthday party with a long white table splitting the set in half. Sat at the table were 10 kids, all of who were dressed up smartly like they were adults. A lanky man in a black and white checkered suit swiftly walked from out of the darkened back walls towards one of the 4 cameras that were stationed around the area. Well, I knew instantly that this was the man of 1,000 faces. Yet his head looked normal, almost indistinguishable to any other person you'd meet in the streets. It was almost too normal. The man of 1,000 faces looked directly into the camera and began to speak. His voice was unnervingly soft, and I could only describe it as sounding like the actor Crispin Glover. "Welcome, children, to today's episode of Frankie's Fun Time. This episode is called Sharing is Caring." A loud comical jingle began to echo through loudspeakers set around the area. The music began to loop as the man of 1,000 faces began to dance along. The music stopped, and a canned laughter track of children began to play. The man of 1,000 faces stopped dancing and once again began to address the camera. "Children, today we have a new friend joining my party table. Let's hear some noise for young Robert Powell." The canned claps and cheers once more filled the area, almost deafening me. I was forced to cover my ears or risk permanently damaging them. A large multicolored prop door was quickly rolled from the darkness behind the set to just behind the table by a man dressed like a 19th century clown. And Robert burst from the door, his arms stretched open wide as if ready for a hug, and with a wide, purposeful smile stretching across his face. More canned cheering began that was even louder than before. How could no one notice this noise? I tried to focus on Robert, but then I noticed something was off. He'd been given a new set of clothes, instead of the pajamas he'd worn when he came in. He now wore a suit that looked professionally tailor-made and resembled something you'd wear to perhaps a wedding or a formal gathering. The man of 1,000 faces walked over to Robert and began speaking into his microphone. "Well, Robert, we're very happy to have you here on the show. Now, as you can see, the party table is full, so it's time for someone to go home. But first, the decision game. What shall it be?" The microphone was pushed in front of Robert, who looked almost in pain from his smile. "Oh, duck, duck, goose," shouted Robert. The speakers erupted again, with hundreds of children shouting, "Duck, duck, goose." The man of 1,000 faces twisted his neck sharply and removed his head. A clown from earlier clumsily ran onto the set and attached a taxidermy goose head onto the stump. I felt my stomach tighten, and a sick bubble began to form from the sight of this monster removing its head and replacing it with a goose's. And to top off the messed up factor, the goose head began to move and talk. How could a man not only remove his head, not die, and then attach a stuffed goose head? Nothing here made any sense to me. The man of 1,000 faces stood firm and looked at the children at the table, and with my attention transfixed on the man, I hadn't noticed them. Every one of them was a missing child from the local area. At the foot of the table sat Kelly Roon, dressed as a stereotypical flower girl. The man of 1,000 faces began walking around the table, slowly patting the children's heads, going duck, duck, duck. Every time he passed over a child, I could see the fear in their eyes, fear that was locked behind a forced, fake smile. The man continued doing circles until he stopped at a little girl roughly 3 seats from the left at the middle. She must have been no older than 6 years at the most. She wore a pretty pink dress with a flower and had a short blonde, crudely done, bowl haircut. The man backed away and the girl's face dropped as she began to cry. The clown picked up the girl and threw her over his shoulder, strolling off into the darkness. Once the girl was out of sight, the man turned to face the camera, saying in a deep, almost dead voice growl, "Goose." I began to inch over towards the direction the clown had dragged the girl. Well, I might not have been able to save Robert, but I might be able to save this girl. When I found the concrete wall, I felt around for a metal door, keeping my back to the wall, hoping no one on the set had seen me. I slowly opened it, making as little noise as possible. I took one last glimpse of Robert, and I squeezed through the door. As soon as I entered the hallway, an overpowering stench, similar to a hospital, assaulted my nose. Everything smelt so clean and sterile. The corridor in front of me was far different from the one I'd entered. Across the walls were white tiles, and the ceiling lights were now fluorescent light bulbs. As I walked down the corridor, I came across 2 doors opposite one another. My curious mind decided to peek inside, but I wish I hadn't. Inside were medical fridges, all labelled with organs and ages. Hearts, ages 5 to 9. Livers, ages 7 to 13. What was this place? Was it some kind of surgery or something? A low metal clunk drew my attention from down the hall. At the far end of the hall sat a set of double doors with the name of a theatre above it. A reasonable person would have run far away by now, but I wasn't a coward, and I didn't want that girl to die, just like every other child. I peeked my head past the doors and nearly screamed. The clown was now wearing a doctor's scrubs, a sheet of plastic as an apron. And the clown was midway through cutting open the girl who lay on a metal table. He began taking out her organs and placing them into different freezer buckets next to his feet. As I leaned in closer, I lost my footing and fell through the door, landing hard on my knee. The clown looked up from his work, and we locked eyes. That moment, everything felt slowed. My adrenaline was pumping overtime, and my brain was trying to think of what my best action would be. The clown began to scream at deafening high pitch, and the sound of heavy boots outside the corridor alerted me that it was now time to leave. I turned and ran through the double doors, only to see 3 headless bodies, one dressed in the signature black and white checker suit, and the other 2 naked but smooth all over, similar to a Ken doll, standing blocking the hall. The sound of a motorized saw blade behind me forced my flight response, and I slid under the legs of the middle man. Running through the metal door, shoulder first, and bolting it behind me, I ran onto the soundstage where I was bombarded with hundreds of boos from the artificial audience. The set was now empty of children, and the man of 1,000 faces. Well, I didn't get enough time to look over the set properly as the 3 headless men kicked the metal door from its hinges. I ran into the hall with all the misshapen doors and got to about midway down the hall before I realized I was running still on the spot. As I looked down, I noticed I was moving backwards towards the door to the set. I ran as fast as I could, jumping the last stretch, barely making it onto the solid floor. And behind me I heard the door smash and the 3 headless men push themselves through it. As I looked back, I saw one of the headless men dig his fingers into the roof and began crawling towards me. The other 2 men began simultaneously crawling across the sidewalls, parallel to each other. I reached up for the hatch on the roof of the hall, but felt a snag on my shirt. One of the headless had grabbed me. As I twisted to free myself, I could now see inside the hole of one of the headless men's neck. Inside were hundreds of metallic-like tethers and what I could only describe as blinking red lights. I used all my power to kick my feet free of the headless man's grasp, sending him onto the moving floor and flying to the other side of the hall. Using this confusion, I climbed out of the hole and bolted the hatch shut before running home, stopping only to throw up from exhaustion. I frantically banged on my front door multiple times, begging to be let inside to the warmth and safety of my home. My very understandably angry dad swung open the door, clenching the aluminum bat he kept next to his bed. He swore bloody at the top of his lungs at me and dragged me inside to bombard me with questions. We both settled down as my mother calmly walked downstairs, seeing what the commotion was about. I explained my story in full multiple times to my sleep-deprived parents, but all they did was brush it off as my overactive mind, coupled with my friend's undoubted involvement. I was sent to bed thoroughly annoyed that no one believed me. Had I just failed at saving Robert? Only the following days would tell. I was forced into the police station the very next day. I was left in a small room with a mirror and a grimy-looking table. After a few minutes, a rather unhealthy-looking cop entered, followed by a man in a grey business suit. The cop spoke first. "Hello, son. I'm Deputy Barnard, and this is Dr. Steen. He's a psychologist from the local hospital." I looked into that doctor's eyes as he reached to shake my hand. Those eyes that I'd seen before, last night. They belonged to the 19th century clown who was butchering that poor girl. I was asked to tell them everything from last night, which I did, apart from mentioning the clown, although I guess that part didn't matter anymore. My story was laughed out of the station near enough by the deputy. As for me, I was to attend therapy from the man who'd started all of this. Going to the session was a horrible ordeal, but I had to for my parents' sake. How could they trust me if I didn't go? On the first day I attended, I sat opposite the doctor, his face contorted into the smile of the clown. He asked me to recount all of the details of the night, from start to finish. Reluctant as ever, I did, and all he did was take notes. He didn't threaten me or hold me captive. He just wrote down everything. The more I attended the therapy, the easier it became to explain my story, until I accidentally let slip about seeing the clown. The doctor's grin grew 10 times over hearing this, and he almost demanded I tell him more. But I stuck to my nerves and I refused. Week after week it was the same thing. I'd sit with the doctor and talk about that night, and once I'd finished, he'd demand I talk about the clown, even going as far as to grab my shoulders and shake me. Eventually, the pressure of the doctor getting in my face had gotten too much for me, and I broke down and told him everything. I told him what had happened with the clown and the headless men. It felt so good to get it off my chest. The day I did spill everything, the doctor stood from his desk, walked in front of me, his eyes fixated on me, looking me up and down. He assured me that our next session would indeed be the last after he'd made some calls. For the entire week I became jittery and uneasy. I couldn't eat or sleep or really do anything productive. My fears of returning to the doctor had begun to ruin my life. Sadly, as is always the case, I had to return for my last therapy session. Convincing my mum had been futile since I started going there, so changing her mind now was out of the question. I sat in the doctor's room alone. It seemed odd he wasn't sat behind his desk, as he always was. As I thought it over more, the door behind me opened. I twisted quickly in my chair, hearing my back crack as I did. And as I watched who'd entered the room, I so wished I hadn't turned around. Standing in front of the door was the doctor, the clown, and the man of 1,000 faces, all of them looking directly at me. Everyone pulled up a chair and formed a circle facing me. The doctor introduced me to the men sat opposite me. Well, after our conversations, I did some digging and found out who the two individuals were who claimed kidnapped you. Friend, these two people are actors from the TV show Party Time at Frankie's. The man of 1,000 faces stood up and introduced himself. Well, hello there, slugger. My name's David Agnew. You must have seen me play my titular hosting part, Frankie. And yeah, I know about those silly little stories and rumors about me, but as you can see, they're not true. His voice was the exact same as from when I'd heard him back at the set. As the man sat down, the clown stood up and did a little jig as he introduced himself. Well, hello, Sonny. My name is Alan Smithy, and I play bongo in the TV show Party Time at Frankie's. He finished his speech with a honk of his foam nose, but I know this wasn't the clown I'd seen from that night. Although his body and face were pinpoint accurate, his eyes weren't the same. The doctor placed a table in front of me and placed a metronome on it. His words went something like, "Look deep into the metronome and hear my voice. What you saw was the backstage of a children's TV show, one your friend was on. He ran away afterwards because he was so upset. You then saw a clown and he scared you, and you ran into some mannequins, and now you're deathly afraid of them." After that, he began saying a series of unconnected words. Frankie, clown, 1,000 faces, TV show, party. After that I blanked out, unable to remember anything. I did, however, start to scream and cry as I saw a clown sat opposite me. After attending the therapy, I was diagnosed with 2 new fears. Automatonophobia, which is a fear of human-like figures that were not alive, like mannequins or robots. And the other being coulrophobia, a fear of clowns. I couldn't walk past shop windows without becoming afraid, nor could I attend the circus or risk breaking down at the sight of the colourful entertainers. Most of my time from then on was spent inside my room, away from my fears, trapped and alone, but safe. Nearly an entire decade passed on with my mind scrubbed, whole years believing something that just wasn't true. Children still occasionally went missing, snatched out of their homes, but now I felt as if it wasn't my problem. I had just finished my senior year at high school and was on the lookout for a job when I came across something in the local paper. Headless body identified as Robert Powell. The body of Robert Powell, who's been missing since 1988, has been found outside the long-abandoned Miskatonic storage warehouse. After an autopsy of the body commenced, the blood and fingerprints were an exact match to Robert's medical profile. The autopsy was conducted by MD Stuart Stein a day after the recovery. More on page 12. I began to remember Robert, how he ran away after appearing on a TV show years ago. I just couldn't remember what it was called, so I went to the only place I knew that would have some record of it, the library. I spent days, almost a week, poring over the periodicals in hope of finding something, or anything. I looked over the newspapers and TV guides, just hoping for a single reference to the show. Every time I thought I drew closer, I hit a dead end. Well, I thought I'd hit the jackpot when reports of a killer dressed as a clown were spotted, but to my annoyance, it was just an article on killer clown sightings in Derry. I sat huddled in my corner of the library, away from prying eyes, as the last patrons of the day shuffled out and the night watchman began to close on me. And I slammed down my fist in frustration. As I did, a horrible breeze softly slipped past me. The breeze must have knocked one of the last newspapers I couldn't reach off of the shelf somehow. As if intended for me to see, the front page lay sprawled on my lap, mocking me. My locked and troubled heart began to beat uncontrollably. There on the page was the man of 1,000 faces, Frankie, and the clown. The adrenaline in my veins forced me to clutch the newspaper tight as the watchmen began to usher me out. I guess they didn't care too much about the newspapers because I still held it in a vice-like grip. I ran home, not stopping for the weather nor the traffic. I was completely oblivious to the world around me. When I reached the safety of my room, I locked my bedroom door with a deadbolt and pushed my cabinet in front of it. I didn't want to be disturbed by anyone. I placed the newspaper onto my desk and began studying it from every angle. To a normal person, it would just have been a normal copy of the Arkham Gazette, but to me, it held answers. The picture on the front was of Frankie and the clown standing among doctors and nurses in the children's ward of Denver's State Hospital. The caption underneath read, "Local doctors celebrate as the first child heart transplant is a success." Dr. Stein West, nephew of ostracized Dr. Herbert West, proved he was indeed nothing like his uncle. Having been donated a heart from a donor, Dr. West modified and then inserted the organ into a pacemaker and successfully transplanted the organ. To help with the festivities, both Dr. West and head nurse Michael Morgan dressed up as the children's favorite TV show characters from Party Time at Frankie's. Nurse Morgan dressed up as host Frankie, who children nicknamed the Man of 1,000 Faces, and Dr. West dressed up as Bongo the Clown. The TV show, as anyone who was around in the 60s would know, was called Party Time at Frankie's. It was a weekly show where children would compete for prizes. Unfortunately, due to the sad passing of Frankie's actor, Randall Yates, the production was shut down and the studio was sold off to Miskatonic University. I put down the paper, trying to comprehend what I just read. Stranger still, as I read certain words, my head began to throb. I made it a painful note to write down the words that hurt. Frankie, clown, 1,000 faces, TV show, party. I then recorded my voice on tape and began playing the words back. Everything I thought I knew was pushed away for the truth. That night I spent at Robert's house, and how he'd been mesmerized by the TV show. The TV show, it's where everything that went bad had begun. Well, that night I stayed up late flicking through the channels on my mini TV, trying to find the correct station. It must have been a few minutes past 3 when I came across the horribly made opening for the show. The obnoxious music blared from the speakers. "Welcome, boys and girls, for the greatest show in the world. Put your hands together for Party Time at Frankie's." As soon as the show began to play, I knew something was wrong. The set looked far more professional and was shot almost like it was on a 16mm camera. When Frankie and the clown appeared, I felt shocked, as they were both most definitely not the two I'd encountered years ago. In fact, this felt like an entirely different show. Every now and then I'd see a brief clip spliced into the footage. It bugged me so much that the next night I carefully took my parents' VCR and copied the show. As I watched over the tape, I became more and more aware that there was a single frame image there. With great effort, I managed to get the single frame on pause. It was something I'd seen before. A single metronome sat mid-swing with a line of text reading, "Come to our studio to appear in an episode of Miskatonic Storage Depot." This is how they'd done it. How they'd hypnotized any child who watched the show. But that was going to stop now. I would make it stop. The following night, I made my way to the now derelict industrial district, just off Derby West Street. The industrial buildings all now looked hollowed and abandoned. Over the course of a few years, Arkham's industries had begun to migrate to cheaper and closer places. The only true industry left here was the surprisingly bountiful fishing trade. I walked in the shadow of corporation warehouses long since forgotten by their owners until I reached it. the overgrown and crumbling ruins of Miskatonic's storage depot. Once I found the hatch to the set, I began attempting to move it, but with no luck. It felt almost welded shut. Well, thinking back, I suddenly got a horrible thought. What if the way forward only opens for children? The notion left me with two viable options. Number one, I could come back with explosives and blow my way inside, but that would let everyone know I was coming. The second idea was better, but it would force my morals to be questioned. I'd have to send a child here. 2 weeks slowly dragged by until I found a babysitting job. Nothing special or spectacular, not a celebrity or anything of the sort. And what happened next felt like a daydream. It was the exact opposite of anything I would have normally done. I let the child watch TV until the show came on, and just like Robert did so many years ago, the child went stiff and began walking out the front door and towards the industrial district. I kept a nice pace with the child and followed him to the trap door, which opened as the child walked towards it. As I dropped down the hole, I hoped to land on the soft carpet, but instead I landed on hard concrete and shreds of ripped carpet. The hallway had not fared any better than the building outside, as all the doors of different shapes and sizes had now all but fallen apart or rotted away. I looked at the child, who gleefully skipped across the floor with no resistance. I thought I wouldn't be so lucky, but as I walked I found the floor slightly shift and then jammed to a stop. My older brain finally clicked on to what had been happening. The corridor was actually a large treadmill, most probably made to stop unwanted visitors. But like the rest of the area around me, it had withered and broken with age. I entered the already decrepit set of Party Time with Frankie. Time had fared no better here either. The set looked decayed and rotted. The only things that looked new were the table and chairs that sat the children. I hid behind the now rotting bleachers. Frankie walked forwards to address the cameras. He looked impossible, by which I mean he hadn't aged a day in well over 9 years. He seemed almost perfectly preserved. And the loud cheers of children that serenaded my ears had all but become horrifically distorted, as if they were the screams of the trapped souls of the dead children. Frankie began his opening line, his voice still sounding the same as it did so long ago. "Welcome, children. Today's episode is called We Can Be Friends." I placed a set of ear protectors over my pounding ears and endured the screams of the artificial audience. "Children, today we have someone new to play with. Let's welcome Christy Gills." Christy, the child I was tasked with looking after, slowly walked through the large door at the back of the set and stood next to the table. Christy had also had a wardrobe change and now stood in a frilly red dress. "So, Christy, tell us what game we should play." Christy thought for a minute and then asked to play hide and seek. Frankie removed his head and replaced it with one that left me in an angry but sad state. His head was now an older Robert, dressed to look like a pirate. In a rough version of Robert's voice, Frankie said, "We play hide and seek then, but first we be needing to remove a crew member." I watched as the clown grabbed a boy around about 12 years old and dragged him to the metal door. I knew what had to be done. Silently I waited and then followed the clown a few moments later. The medical hallway looked so clean and well kept, definitely not like the rest of the set. The smell of cleaning fluid and canistered oxygen still assaulted my nose, only this time I knew what it was. As I peeked through the doors down the corridor, I could finally understand what was going on. It would seem the good doctor was harvesting children's organs, possibly to sell on the black market. The other door I hadn't looked in now lay ajar, and inside lay the 3 headless bodies and a large collection of heads in jars. The heads sat all motionless, with their eyes closed. They almost looked like they were sleeping. The liquid looked thick and had a green, luminous tinge to it, giving off the feeling it was some kind of mucus. As I circled around the bodies, I got a perfect look into the hole where the heads would have been attached. Inside was a mesh of human organic tissue and metallic pipes connecting everything. But I guess I'd say it was an augmented body. I followed 2 large cables that dug deep into all of their chests towards the far wall. The pipe connected to some kind of power generator that was supplying them with energy, and another pipe was plugged into a vat of the green liquid, pumping it into the bodies. I don't know why, but I pushed the lever on the tank down, depleting the vat to roughly a quarter full. The headless ones began to violently shake, uncontrollably, until their chests burst open, ejecting the green liquid all over the room. Next I began dragging the jars off the walls and stamping on them. A selection of different heads, both human and animal. Well, I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I stood motionless in the room as the door flung open. Standing there, with an expression of shock, was Dr. Stein, still dressed in his clown gear. I watched as Stein began to laugh maniacally, as if some sort of joke had just been told. Without thinking, I grabbed one of the tubes and thrust the pipe into his chest. Stein shrieked in pain, trying to grab at the pipe, but it was too late. The green liquid had begun pumping into his body. With his last words, Stein looked at me and said something, a single word. Lian. My mind cast back to when I was a child in therapy. Dr. Stein had stood next to me and whispered these words into my ear. Kill the headless. Kill them all. Then you will kill me, and finally you must present me at the table where you shall sit and wait for the police. Stein's laughter dragged me out of my daze as he exploded in a shower of blood and the green liquid. I felt like a puppet on a string as I dragged all 4 bodies through the metal door and onto the set. All the children lay dead in their seats, having had their necks snapped. As for Frankie, he was nowhere to be seen. I heard the sirens outside, but didn't stop doing my task. I was unable to. As I sat at the table, the entire police force pushed through the entrance door, guns at the ready. No amount of explaining in the world would get me out of this. I was sentenced to life in prison for being a copycat stalker, as well as murdering over 10 children. My saving grace, however, wasn't much good. I was given a pardon from life in prison, but instead placed into Arkham Sanitarium. It's been nearly 30 years since then, so I decided to write this, and, well, why now, you might ask? Well, as you know, I'm scheduled for a lobotomy from my newly assigned therapist. The strangest thing is that he looks so similar, like a friend I had as a child. And every time we have a session together, he only says 2 words to me. Headless, soon.
And now on to our final destination for this evening in Darktown. Well, they say that dying gives you peace, a bright light at the end of the tunnel. But for this young man, well, that light led somewhere darker, something twisted pulling him back again and again. After surviving 18 heart-stopping moments in 1 year, he became addicted to that 7 minutes of bliss beyond life. Desperate for another taste, he discovered a shadowy corner of the internet, a place where whispers talk of a game, the suicide game. Not for the faint-hearted, this game promised a gateway to the other side, but not everyone returns. Now our protagonist has one question left to answer. How far would he go to touch that bliss again?
The game to end all games. People always talk about the blinding light of bliss and peace they see during the last moment of their life. Like there's some indescribable force that pulls them towards their final destination, a place they can see their loved ones again, an infinity of painless existence. Well, that's nothing like what I experienced during the 18 times my heart has stopped in the past year. Apparently, Being merely 27 years old is not an excuse not to suffer from sudden cardiac death. At least, not when I had an undiagnosed heart condition called Wolff-Parkinson-White. An extra nerve in my heart put it into overdrive, and I was essentially dead for about 7 minutes. Those were the best 7 goddamn minutes of my entire life. After a brief moment of chest pain and my face kissing the floor, there wasn't a hint of pain in my being anymore. To the best of my knowledge, I was still on Earth, but somehow wandering the streets in front of my childhood home. I saw my parents playing with a younger version of myself in the garden, running around on a beautiful summer's day, chasing me with a water hose. My mum was holding a couple of ice cream cones for me and my dad. It was a moment of pure bliss, locked safely in my fondest memories. My life didn't flash by, and I was simply trapped in a beautiful moment. And although I knew I died, I felt no fear. However long I spent watching myself, it was simply not meant to last. Before long, I was violently jolted back into reality as they shocked my heart into a normal rhythm. I woke up for a brief moment, screaming in agony before passing out once more, something I don't remember, but was told by the nurses after the fact. They sorted out my heart as best they could, cut the extra nerve, and kept me in the hospital for observation. I had survived unscathed from the ordeal, and after a bit of healing, they allowed me to go home. Well, call it limbo, the place in between, or friggin' afterlife. Whatever you name it, I knew I needed to go back. Unfortunately, the internet doesn't offer much in terms of the afterlife. I suppose they have bad internet reception there. So, I resorted to the next best thing. Forums about people who had temporarily died but returned from the brink of their own demise. Searching for that, I found exactly what you'd expect. The bright lights, the tunnel, and even some who claimed there existed nothing but darkness. Their experiences might have been just as real as my own, but ever so slightly different, and definitely not what I was looking for. I ventured deeper, checking out methods of suicide. Now, don't get me wrong, I absolutely did not wish to leave this life quite so soon, but there had to be a way to temporarily die and then get brought back without permanent damage. Of course, Googling suicide only served to get me a list of prevention hotlines, so that was a short and unsuccessful mission. Even the deep web had little more to offer. A few forums that weren't listed on any casual browser, some with different experiences, people coming back with a profound new respect for life, and others who wanted nothing more than just to remain dead. Well, one click link led to another, and before I knew it, I had ventured far down the rabbit hole to a website no person was ever meant to enter. Without providing a link, it was simply titled The Suicide Game. It was plainly designed, like any other forum, seemingly originating from the early days of the internet. Only text, no images. The posts varied from questions on what to expect from death and what people had seen on the other side. Holy shit, what just happened? By The Returned. What's the longest you've ever been dead for? By Dead Man 20. Any advice for a first-timer? By A Bit Afraid 2. Well, you get the gist. There was a sticky post lingering at the top of the page that caught my attention. Submitted by the sole user marked as an admin. Their name was Lazarus. How to Temporarily Kill Yourself by Lazarus. Without hesitation, I clicked the link. It would either be legit, or just a scam to somehow get money, or provide a free virus for my computer. Either way, I would quickly discover the truth. Are you brave enough to have a peek on the other side of life? Finally get a first-hand answer about what happens once we die? Maybe you've already had a glimpse and want more, but without the mess of actually staying dead. Then, Mortinux might just be for you. A catchy description, I thought to myself, as I scrolled a bit further down, only to be met by a much more serious message. Warning. Read the following before purchasing Mortinux. Individuals who suffer from a chronic heart, liver or kidney disease, as well as psychological disorders, should refrain from using Mortinux in any capacity. The drug will temporarily stop your heart from 1 to 3 minutes by altering nerve conductivity between your atrioventricular node and Purkinje system. The electrical activity is quickly restored as the drug dissolves, and you will be back to normal. Instructions on dosage will follow your order. Do not, under any circumstances, exceed recommended dosage or frequency of administration. Package contents: 24 sublingual tablets. Delivery time, 5 to 7 days. Don't believe us? Try a sample of free tablets, free of charge. I clicked on the last link for the free sample. Yeah, taking drugs from a stranger is objectively a bad idea, but honestly, who would voluntarily part with expensive drugs just to mess with someone? Even though I had suffered a heart attack, the doctors had assured me it would not occur again after having undergone treatment. After all, I was still a young man with a rare but treatable heart condition. I waited 5 days, and the sample arrived in my mail, conveniently disguised as regular vitamin C tablets. I locked myself in and read the instructions. It was pretty much the same as advertised on the website, with some advice on where to take the pills and to have some water and food prepared for your recovery. After little consideration, I thoughtlessly put one of the pills under my tongue. It burned slightly as it dissolved in my mouth. I counted my breaths nervously, holding one hand on my chest to see if it was working. Darkness. I don't even remember going out. Stripped from my body, I found myself walking inside an unfamiliar house. A family sat in a small living room, warmly lit up by a burning fireplace. Their windows were covered by a thin layer of snow, and a beautifully decorated Christmas tree stood idly in the corner, protecting a pile of colourful presents. A young couple sat snuggled up in a sofa, watching as their little son ran around with an excited smile on his face. It must have been quite early in the morning, because it was still dark outside. The kid grabbed one of the presents and tore off the wrapping paper. Their shared bliss froze me in place. I could feel their warmth as I watched them just living their best life, not a care in the world as long as they had each other. The son shrieked in excitement as he discovered a set of tiny model cars hidden within his presents. He instantly started playing around, making pretend races with his new toys. It was the purest moment I had ever seen. Their happiness radiated towards me, filling me with unspeakable joy. The crackling fireplace emitting its angelic sound, getting louder by each passing second. In fact, it was too loud. A log had somehow fallen out, and a spark had set fire to the curtains. I yelled out for the family, but I was nothing more than an invisible observer in their world. Within a minute, the room became engulfed in flames, and the distracted family had not noticed it in time to get out. The door was blocked by flames, and I could do nothing but to watch helplessly while they burned to death in their home. I violently gasped for air as I was brought back into the real world. I still heard the helpless screams of the family echoing in my ears. In real life, only a couple of minutes had passed, but it felt much longer in purgatory. I'm not ashamed to admit, I wept. Throughout my life, I've had loss, my parents dying at a young age from terrible disease. I've gone broke due to student debt, and have had some trouble finding a place in life, but nothing compared to watching that family hopelessly being trapped with no chance of escape. 2 pills remained from the free sample I'd received, and I threw them both away without a second thought. I wouldn't voluntarily go through that again. A couple of weeks passed as I attempted to push the memory of the ordeal to the deepest pit of my mind, pretending it had been no more than a horrible nightmare. But life's a bitch, and then you die. Quite literally in my case. By some stroke of luck, I had landed an interview, but on my way to said meeting, I suffered another massive heart attack. My chest was pounding, pain stretching down my arm and to my back. I couldn't breathe nor call for help. I simply fell to the ground, clutching my chest, once again enveloped in blinding, everlasting darkness. There were no illusions of pleasantries awaiting me on the other side that time. I was plunged straight into a nightmare of sorrow. I stood on a quiet road in the middle of God knows where, surrounded by tall trees protecting the place from sight. I had nowhere to go. A car lied smashed to bits on the side of the road. A woman, clearly broken by the impact, was hanging halfway out of the door, while a man desperately yelled for help. His phone had died on impact, and he had no means to call for anyone. No way to save his dying wife. Again, I was watching the worst moment of someone's life. A man who sobbed while he told the woman he loved as she slipped away into the afterlife. Despite the pain I shared with them in that moment, I also felt the presence of something even darker looming over me. I looked around to get a glimpse of silhouette in the distance, disappearing as fast as I fixated my eyes on it. It appeared humanoid, but much taller in stature. Before I could do anything else, I was dragged back to life. Now, let me tell you, the pain from the cracked ribs after having an inexperienced person performing chest compressions on you is not something you want to feel after waking up from death for the 3rd time. But somehow, I had returned to the land of the living once more. According to the doctors, my heart was now permanently damaged. Not from the initial disease, but because of trauma. They told me the first heart attack was the cause, lack of oxygen for 7 minutes and all that, but, well, I knew better. That damned pill was the culprit. After frantically searching for the website, doing my best to retrace the steps I'd taken last time, I finally stumbled upon the suicide game once more. Welcome back, a pop-up message displayed, remembering that I'd previously received an order of pills. There hadn't been a single new post since my last visit. I jotted it down to being an obscure website no sane person would visit. But as I scrolled down, I noticed that the forum had been quite the active place until just 1 month ago. Most of the posts were about expectations and experiences, no sign of any complaints. But I kept browsing, clicking further back on the forum until I finally found something that matched my predicament. The post simply said, "I think I brought something back with me from the other side." I clicked on the link with a trembling finger, both hopeful and afraid to learn the answer. So, I've been using the pill for about a month now, and honestly, it was the most amazing month of my life. I've seen things I could never dream of, and most of my lifelong questions have been answered in one way or another. But, well, It's not the same anymore. He used to be so pleasant, so nice. But now, well, I keep seeing people dying around me. There's something else with me when I go there. Just like these shadows that are following me around. At first, I thought I had taken too many pills or something. But now I keep seeing them in real life. I don't know what to do. Is this a side effect of the drug? Oh, I'm sorry if this isn't too coherent, but I'm freaking the fuck out. That was his last entry. A few other people commented similar experiences, giving the silhouetted figures a name. The shadow people. Some of the users suggested stopping the pills, while others said to just ignore the shadows, as they weren't interfering. Nothing there could help someone like myself, who regularly suffered from unexplainable heart attacks, even when not using the drug. No. Had I not thrown away the remaining pills, maybe the doctors could have helped me. But I was doomed by my own hand. While trying to play with death, I'd invited it into my life. They did what they could, giving me some anti-arrhythmic medication and an implantable defibrillator. It could buy me some time, but the doctors were not hopeful for my prognosis, saying I could last a few years if I turned out to be very lucky. It wouldn't even be a month before I suffered another heart attack. The defibrillator tried its best to put my heart back into sinus rhythm, but during that time, I once again faced another horrific sight. Despite being unconscious for less than a minute, it appeared that time passed very differently while in limbo. What met me on the other side was nothing less than a massive natural disaster. An earthquake in a country I couldn't recognize. Structures had fallen around me, and all that echoed through the air with the cries of despair. I couldn't understand the language, but the pain, well, that needed no translation. I walked around to see people crushed by fallen concrete. Some were trapped, while others were moments from death. My eyes met those of a man gasping his last breath, but when his lights went out for the last time, I could have sworn he stared back at me. He understood what was about to happen, a sense of peace falling over him as he knew he was no longer alone. He had passed on to whatever realms exist after death. But for a brief moment, we had been together in purgatory. I remain in solitude. I walked around the ruins of what used to be the home of thousands of people, witnessing destruction far beyond anything they could cope with. The shadow people lurked in my peripheral vision. They were just like the silhouette I'd seen before, but clearer this time, undoubtedly humanoids. They simply stared at me as I wandered around, pitying the traumatized citizens. I was repeatedly brought back from purgatory, never being allowed to simply remain dead and finally move on. Each time, I would be greeted by horrific sights, intertwined with the shadows studying my every move in their domain. In the coming months, I would die 14 more times, never permanently, naturally, but enough to realize I had meddled with something I was never supposed to. I knew it, and the shadow people knew it. Little by little, they started following me back from limbo. They were everywhere, never interfering, never approaching, simply observing me as if I was some sort of pathetic lab rat. There's a fine line between life and death, a brief moment where people exist in purgatory. For most, this is nothing more than a short journey on the road to a better place. But for some who are stuck, this can be an everlasting nightmare. At the moment of death, I know they can see me and I do my best to assure them. Whether I am being kept alive by the efforts of the doctors, or by the mysterious pill I consumed so long ago, I don't know. I'm just patiently awaiting the day I can finally rest. My only comfort while I wait is to provide the passing people with a brief moment of peace as they accept their fate.
Well, if you're still here with me, first of all, thank you. This has been one incredible twisted journey through the dark corners of storytelling. Almost 2 hours of chilling anthologies. Well, I know that's no small commitment from any of you, and I don't take it for granted. I just want to say how much it means to me that you guys take the time so regularly to join me in diving deep into these stories. It's not just about the scares or the suspense. It's about exploring these themes, keep us up at night and connecting over tales that make us feel, something. You know what I mean? Yeah, anyway, I'm waffling again. So if these stories gave you the chills or made you think a little differently, even for a moment, I guess that's exactly why I'm here. So thank you for being here, for being a part of this, as always. I say it often, but I really couldn't do this without you. And I have a ton more planned, so please stick around. Okay, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. As always, my friends, stay curious, stay brave. I'll see you in the next one. Take care, everyone, and very sweet dreams. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.